Good evening, everyone. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Booksellers. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that McNally Robinson is located here in Treaty 1 territory. That's the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. We are so thrilled that you could all join us here tonight for what is the inaugural event of our fall 2023 season, and I can't think of any better way to celebrate that than by welcoming Patrick deWitt back to the city to celebrate the Librarianist. You'll be hearing a little bit more about the book in just a moment and hearing from tonight's featured author, but first, what you are all here for, the housekeeping notes at the beginning of the event. So, first of all, we are co-presenting this event with our good friends at the Winnipeg International Writers Festival. Their festival is coming up, and we have a number of events that we partner with over the fall. The director, Charlene Deal, will be here with us after the event just to offer a few closing comments and tell you a little bit more about the festival. Over the course of this evening, there will be, and apologies for anybody who heard the spiel already, a brief reading here, then a conversation to my left, and after that, we'll turn things over to questions from you. So if you do have a question, please just raise your hand. I'll run up to you with this microphone to ensure that everybody here and watching at home can hear the question, and then it shall be answered. At the close of the event, following Charlene's comments, we'll just ask you all to remain in place for one moment so that we can safely transport Patrick deWitt over to a table just beside our cash desk. Now, you'll be invited over there to line up after that. I'll have a Post-it note and a pen, and we'll go down the line to write your first name inside of every book. This is just to ensure that you can spend more time at the signing table chatting rather than spelling when you actually get there. We'll have copies of all of his books at the signing table. We also have copies at our central cash desk. Please feel free to get a book signed before you pay for it. Just as mentioned previously, please do pay for the book at some point this evening. I won't take up too much more of your time. Suffice it to say, The Librarianist is an unsurprisingly superlative book from Patrick deWitt, which sounds a little bit reductive. All of his books are incredible in very different ways, and this one is flushed with that elusive watchmaker quality that his work has, where you reach the final page, everything folds together so beautifully and harmoniously that it seems like the story could not have progressed in any other way, despite all of its incredible detours. So I'm particularly thrilled to hear a little bit more about the book tonight, and for you all to meet Bob Comet, if you have not already. Now, our featured guest tonight, Patrick deWitt, is the author of the novels French Exit, which was an international bestseller and a finalist for the Scotiabank Giller Prize, The Sisters Brothers, which was the winner of the Governor General's Literary Award for Fiction, and the Atwood Gibson Writers Trust Fiction Prize, and a finalist for the Booker Prize and the Scotiabank Giller Prize. He is also the author of the critically acclaimed Under Major Domo Minor and Ablutions. Born in British Columbia, he now resides in Portland, Oregon. Your host for this evening, whom I am contractually obligated to say good things about, is Chris Hall. He has been with McNally Robinson Booksellers for more than 25 years, more than 10 of which is owner. When he isn't reading or walking, he loves to travel and cook. He lives in Winnipeg and is currently training his daughters to be booksellers. You'll be hearing from Chris in a little while, but first, please join me in welcoming Patrick deWitt.
Hello, thank you. It's nice to be back. I'm going to read a free fish excerpt. I'm finding it a difficult book to read in excerpt because the sort of big sections, there's a lot leading up to the big sections that it's hard for me to summarize. So we're going to read a section which is just a description of Bob Comet, protagonist of the book. At this phase of the book, he's in his early 70s. He's a retired librarian. He's begun helping out at a senior center near his home in Portland, Oregon. You're going to meet the director of the senior center, whose name is Maria. And you're also going to meet Jill. This is basically a study of one of the characters who is there are people who live full-time residents at this center, and then there are people who just spend their days there, non-residents, and Jill is a non-resident. And Jill's a little bit of a grouch. So we're going to hear about Jill and Bob's relationship to Jill. Jill was a sincerely negative human being with unwaveringly bad luck and an attitude of ceaseless, headlong indignation. Every day she was met with evidence of a hostile fate, and every day she endeavored to endure it, but also to combat it, but also to locate people to talk to. She found Bob Comet willing to listen to a degree that was, she told him quietly, as if it were a secret she could somehow keep from him while at the same time telling him, uncommon. In this way, he was precious to her, but she was never gentle with him, never thankful. Bob was like a horse run and never fed or watered, only whipped. By the end of Bob's first month at the center, he had established something like a friendship with Jill, or would pass for friendship in her world. No warmth, but a familiarity, with each party comfortable to act as him and herself. Bob couldn't say what Jill thought of him, but he found her an engaging presence, and he began to look forward to their communications whenever he moved in the direction of the Gamble Reed Senior Center. It was a moody day. Bob arrived at the center and found Jill at her usual station, where she was working on yet another 1,000-piece puzzle, a desert sky at dawn, cluttered with hot air balloons. She did not say hello to Bob because she never said hello to Bob, but he knew she knew he was there, and he knew she would eventually speak, and that this speaking would be the naming of a complaint, and it was. She sighed a long sigh and said, "I'm so tired, Bob." "Rough night?" he asked. "Stupid question," she said. Bob took a puzzle piece and began searching for its position in the picture. "I thought there were no stupid questions," he said. "Where'd you hear that?" she asked. "On the internet." Jill laughed ruefully to herself. Anti-internet sentiment was common from Jill. Bob had had almost no experience with that overvast landscape, but somewhere along the line, Jill decided he was a devotee and she was disdainful of his behaviors. She began pumping her hands, explaining to Bob that she had at long last regained the feeling in her thumbs. Previously, she complained that she could not feel them. "That's good," Bob said. "No, it isn't," she told him, explaining that the numbness had been replaced by a throbbing pain in the thumb joints. The reference to her thumb pain made her think of other pains, and she became expansive on the subject, soliloquizing about her history with pain, the pain of her youth, the pain of midlife, and her present engagement with it. She spoke of pain as perceived punishment, pain as a discipline, and lastly, about how much the pain hurt. "You understand that, right?" she said. "Understand what?" asked Bob. "It's only pain if it hurts." This seems self-evident. But then, as was not uncommon, Jill made Bob doubtful of his own knowledge. He thought of his own aches, which in recent months had been mounting, and he asked, "What's the definition of hurts?" She said, "Do you involuntarily jolt in your seat? Are you sucking in short, sharp breaths with your eyes shut tight? Does your vision go red with splotchy flashes, and you're worried you might fall over or faint?" "No," said Bob. "What you're experiencing," said Jill, "is not pain. It's discomfort." "Not pain," said Bob. "Discomfort is not pain," said Jill. She said that her pain was near constant and impossible to get used to not be surprised by. She spoke of a wish to measure her pain, a volume or weight she might assign it to share with doctors, with strangers, with bus drivers. "People would be impressed if they knew the size of it," she said. "The way it is now, they simply can't understand. You can't." Now they worked on the puzzle in earnest, silent competition. With both of them going full tilt, they completed the image in 90 minutes. As soon as it was done, Jill broke it up and returned the pieces to the box. Later in the morning, they were sitting under the television watching a show where 4 adult women screamed at each other in front of a live audience of adult women who also were screaming. There was an unknowable emotional connection between the women on stage and those in the audience. The more the women on stage screamed, the more the screaming of the audience also increased. At times, the two groups were screaming with all their vigor and volume, altogether too profound a passion for 1 o'clock in the afternoon, was Bob's thought. During a commercial break came a comparative silence, and Bob turned to Jill, who was staring at him. She asked Bob if she told him about her new heater. He said she hadn't. Tell me now, he said, and she did. Her new heater, a fickle and mysterious device. It would sit in cold silence in defiance of its own onness, then roar to life in the middle of the night while Jill slept, overheating and smoking black acrid smoke, which set off her fire alarms, which woke up her neighbors, who twice had called in the fire department, who permanently damaged Jill's carpets with their clanky, filthy boots. This was a classic Jill yarn, and that the problems were multifold and collectively unwieldy. In listening to such stories as this, it was easy to become lost in the mirror maze of her misfortune. But Bob wished to be helpful, and so he always made to seek out the root of any one particular problem in hopes of uncovering a solution and improving the quality of Jill's life in some small way. You should unplug the heater before you go to bed, he told her. I did unplug it, Bob, that's what I'm saying. The heater turned itself on when it was unplugged. Bob said, I don't think that's true, Jill. Anyway, it was turned off and I went to sleep, she said. It's not the same thing, though, said Bob. They watched a commercial for laundry detergent that featured an animate teddy bear crawling into a washing machine. Jill said, he's going to get more than he bargained for. The screaming show resumed, but Jill hit the mute button. I'm not done talking about the heater, she said. Okay, said Bob. Jill paused as if steeling herself. I think that the heater is not just a heater, she said finally. What else is it, said Bob. I think the heater is what's called an oracle, said Jill. What, said Bob. The heater's behavior feels threatening to me, she said. You believe the heater has a point of view, said Bob. I believe it's communicating bad news, she said. But what is it telling you? It's telling me my future. What's your future? Well, think about it, Bob. Where is it hot? Bob looked into Jill's eyes for some sign of levity, but he found only the dark and swirling galaxy of herself. He understood she was confessing a difficult and fearsome truth, which on the one hand was flattering that Bob had achieved the status of a confidant. But then, and on the other hand, the confession disturbed. Bob asked Jill if she'd kept the receipt. It was on sale, she was no terms. At the conclusion of the screaming television show, Bob said goodbye to Jill and made for the director, Maria's office. Jill thinks her space heater is psychic and that it's telling her she's going to go to hell, he said. Maria looked over Bob's shoulder, then back at Bob. Okay, she said. She waved goodbye, but Bob lingered in the doorway. May I make an observation? He said. You may. I don't want to overstep. Spit it out, Bob. I think Jill would be better off as a resident. At this, Maria winced. Full-time Jill, she said. I know, but maybe she'd be less Jillish if she felt safer. Maria made a long exhalation. Let me think about it, she said. Bob took a new route home, a long and roundabout line. He was not killing time, for Bob Comet was not a time killer. But he knew that when he entered his home, then the part of the day where something unexpected could happen would be over, and he wasn't quite ready for that just yet. He was looking up and into the windows of the houses as he passed them by. He was wondering about the lives of the people inside. It was a late fall afternoon, damp in the air, damp on the pavement, but it was not raining. Now the lights were coming on in the windows of the houses and the smoke began issuing from certain of the chimneys. Was this the long dusk that Jill had once warned Bob about? Bob Comet sometimes had the sense that there was a well inside him, a long bricked column of cold air with still cold water at the bottom.
Thank you, John. Thank you. That was great. And welcome back to Winnipeg, to McNally Robinson.
Yeah, happy to be here.
We were talking about your last visit was for French exit.
Yes.
And prior to that, both our memories go a little bit.
I feel that I've been here before, but I can't quite recall.
I'm sure you have too.
Yeah.
Well, that's,
Yeah.
I'm sure somebody here remembers. So I wanted to start by talking about what I would call your voice style, I guess. As I read about you, seems every interviewer, every reviewer seems to want to define it in some way. I ran across loopy, quirky, stealth absurdist, weird, skewed. I was wondering if do you have a description or do you have one that's particularly confusing?
No. I mean, all the books are just written per my specifications as a reader, which I think is the norm for an author, any author that's writing a book that they would like to. But that's sort of the bullseye of the thing that we're collecting for. I hate the word quirky.
Yeah, I wouldn't abuse myself either.
And once there was audience Q&A and one asked me if I was quirky, I've actually been here. And quirky, and I was like, I don't know what to say right now, because I'm comfortable. I understand its usage, and I suppose the word falls under that umbrella, and I accept it. I moved on. It's just one of those words I oftentimes with criticism or praise, even your work is described in a way that feels or sounds alien, you can't relate to emotionally. There's an example of that.
Yeah. How about odd? Because odd is a word that jumped off the page of French exit for me. There's a moment where Francis is called odd.
Oh.
And it's like this moment of realization almost, or maybe concession. And, I mean, how would you describe odd? Odd being odd seems like there's kindness to odd.
Bob's an outlier, I think, in terms of my work, and that he's not particularly odd. I think he's more passive, passive observer in his own way, and less gregarious. And he has a comedic point of view, but it's so subtle and quiet, so muted that he's more somebody who watches his way for her rather than is out there at the front line, sort of like ripping it up, So Bob is the outlier. I don't think we can point to him as sort of, the typical of my work. I think more common is somebody who is, I think odd is fair, but these are words that I guess I would just say these are characters who are interesting to me. So, I agree that the work falls under the umbrella of the odd or the uncommon or the weird, but I think that that's also representative of my experience in life. I think that life is quite odd and weird, and sometimes in a negative sense, and sometimes in a really positive, sort of joyful, pleasant sense. But whatever exists in my book are things I think that exist in the world for me, or things that I see, and I regurgitate them or molding them. But it's truthful emotion. It's not frivolity. Not that there's not frivolity in the work, because there is. I take the non-seriousness of it quite seriously, if that makes sense.
Well, it's a nice counterpoint to the series. There's these bursts of even just turns of phrase that make you go. I described it as smiled all the way through because of these transcripts, but at the same time it's very subdued and quiet moments.
Yeah, I thank you for the phrase thing. I think of myself as somebody who, some people you read, and some of my favorite authors you read, and you don't necessarily get a sense of their love of language. It's there because I don't think you write a book without, you don't think you write a good book without the narrative language communication. But a big part of the joy of writing long form fiction for me is the filling in. So section A, something significant happens in the beginning and then the end of that same section. You've got the tying up, and there's lots of room to, not for, I don't want to say pyrotechnics because it sounds frivolous, but thinking of new ways to say something familiar, making the known thing. I mean, descriptive writing, somebody picks up a copy, puts it down. That's the most challenging for me because I'm not just trying to do that in a way that it registers with the reader, so he or she understands what's going on, mechanics of motion. But I'm also trying to say it in a way that's artful and occasionally in possession of some kind of beauty, because I love language. I love language. So maybe it might be a symptom of my relative youth, and I may become colder as the days and books go by, but I still do enjoy the process of actually not just fleshing out a narrative and making the characters three-dimensional, but describing somebody picking that up.
So you've written 5 novels now, all of them great, in case you miss any. I saw a lot of similarity, I guess, between French exit and this. I don't know if it's tone or something, but also characters in particular, like Francis and Malcolm are so withdrawn, and Bob is withdrawn.
Yeah.
Similar but different. With Francis and Malcolm they can afford not to participate. Bob is different. What makes Bob withdrawn?
Well, there's a few characters most of my characters I can relate to in one way or another. It's not common for me not to be able to relate, maybe not overtly personally, but I can relate to Bob insofar as at a young age I recognized that I wasn't necessarily going to be somebody who liked being groups, present company excluded. Just parties and just I preferred small gatherings where I didn't really like being alone more than what was the norm. I still like it. And this is sometimes thought to be defined as antisocial, and so that never really made sense to me because it's not that I have such an affection for people, but I feel like I can't be myself in a large group, and I lose my sense of myself, and I'm just one who I think prefers solitude or in a relative solitude. So I also at a young age discovered reading fiction, and it was not just enjoyable, but it answered a larger question, not just what will I do with the rest of my life, but it did answer that question, but that was sort of a bonus. It felt medicinal in some way. It meant more to me than it was surprising how much I enjoyed it. And coming to read more and more and recognizing that it was such a relief, recognizing at an early age before I was 20, I'm never going to read all the books. There's no end to this. And that was such good news. Because your tastes change, and if you're on a proper quest, it doesn't end. You can't get to the bottom of it. There's a bottom of it. There's new work being generated, there's all sorts. So that's something that Bob, I would imagine, probably felt. But there's other characters in the book, like Ethan is sort of his doppelganger. This is a comrade of his, is sort of one true male friend that he had in his early 20s. And that relationship ended poorly and became a source of very painful memory for Bob. But Ethan is gregarious and he's sort of partier, he's a bit of a cat, Lothario, and I can also, not that I'm like explicitly any or all of those things, but I can also relate to his worldview, his modus operandi. I completely forgot what the question was. I think it just comes to some people naturally. I think that it probably has something to do with his childhood, which is why I wrote so extensively about it. He was in a situation of feeling at once invisible, but also in the way, which is complicated for anyone to feel that way. He was also fortunate in the same way that I was, in that he found his calling or vocation at a young age. Preceding my recognizing that I wanted to write for the rest of my life, which I realized, at 16 or 17, that was a real dream for me. I was really worried about what I was going to do when I grew up, because I saw all around me, I saw, not my home, but I guess I'm thinking of my teachers and for teachers in public school. A lot of people seemed unhappy to me. And I recognized that there was a link between career decisions and one's sense of well-being. And I was really, felt very fraught to me. And I worked in a number of kind of, I don't know how to describe them, like not very good jobs while I was studying alone. You know, I was sort of just going to the library a lot and trying to figure out how to write and working some job where I wasn't being challenged in my, you know, and I really felt at a certain point, I'd been a dishwasher at the bar that became the subject matter of my first book for 6 years. And to be a 30-year-old dishwasher with a child on the way is complicated. And the idea of ever publishing anything, much less having a proper book come out, just seems to becoming more and more elusive, rather than I didn't feel like I was getting any closer. So I was worried, and the answer always was there though, which is the solace that I found in language, books, reading, but also writing. So anyway, all of these real world biographical tidbits folded into the character of Bob. I think he and I are different in a lot of ways, but there's some sort of core belief system that he and I share. And it's just rooted in affection for human beings and rooted in affection for language. We aren't made by human beings. The summation of other people's lives through invented stories. I don't know. Also, the vehicle of the book, I just think that a book is a flawless method of delivery, you know, for aesthetic information. You know, books are good. So.
Another word that's in the book and place wrote it, but is melancholy. And it's a word that is defined in the book. In fact, June, one of the women at the Hotel Alba, and she says, melancholy is the wistful identification of time as thief. And it was rooted in the memories of past love and success. Sorrow is a more hopeless proposition. Sorrow is the understanding you shall not get that which you crave and perhaps deserve. And it is rooted in or encouraged by, the death impulse.
Yeah, I don't think those are actually accurate. She's just sort of person.
Yeah, she is.
It's more her emotional definitions. I don't know if it was hold out. Yes.
They don't do too bad. That wistful identification of time as thief.
The feeling of melancholy is one that is quite a sweet feeling to me. And it's something that can be leaned into without the ill effects of, say, like an actual depression. It's not bleak, it's sort of a craving, almost feeling, or a sweet recollection. But the idea of melancholy to me, I'm for it. I'm pro melancholy, and you find yourself in that state. I think it's a good place to work from. I don't know. I find sorrow, a certain type of sorrow. Hopeless sorrow is one thing, but the other thing, which is just I think part of being alive and being at least a little bit sensitive. You know, it's like life is life without melancholy. And when it occurs, oftentimes I can sort of summon it when I'm working. When it occurs, it's as long as it's not relentless, you know, when I end, it's nice too, but there's something, it's like a place to go, I guess is how I feel. And it's a place that I often work from. And I think some of my better work comes from that place.
Well, it resonated with me because I've been an advocate of melancholy for
I think
it's a happy, sad, responsive between.
Yeah.
And I was saying it's a creative space because I think that like something about melancholy in the creative process, and I was going to ask you about writing. You more or less said that. So Francis and Bob, there's similarities then between us and drawing as artists.
Yeah, I would say that protagonist of evolution is maybe a little bit more than melancholic. Lucy Meyer's melancholic. I hadn't thought of it, but it's true. I read the same book over and over.
They're different. But Bob is a reader, and the reader is different. The reader is more of the audience. The audience sits and and watches the show.
Yeah,
And so, and you kind of alluded to this already, that Bob has somehow become the audience in his own life, maybe too.
yeah, I mean, he's reading his own, but he's sort of reading his own life. Like, reading isn't, I don't think of reading as perfectly passive to me. When you're reading, it depends on what you're reading, I suppose. But if you're reading in this sort of zone I like to be in when I'm reading, you're putting something into it. It's not just like watching a film, which you have to put yourself in. Actually, not I mean that film. I just mean there's something about, you know, there's blanks in the book, and you fill the blanks with your own life experience, your feelings in the moment. You're engaging with the author, ideally. And a lifetime of, just to say it, let's say watching frivolous television or something, is different than a life of engaging with fiction. And I think that one is better for you at the time. I think that there's been times in my life, not uncommon really, where I feel like I'm reading too much and I need to relax, live a little, or you know. But generally speaking, I think it's something that gives me more than it takes. It's not just taking time, so it's time used wisely, it's sort of bubbly, so it's time well spent in my opinion, I think I'll agree with that.
And you anticipated my next question, because Connie believes that Bob reads beyond the acceptable level of personal pleasure. And when I first read that, I got defensive for Bob. But the more I think about it, the more I wonder, and do you see something to Connie on that?
I do. I think that Bob probably could have been a little bit more active. And I probably could too. But you know, what do you
And it's so balanced, isn't it? Because-
yeah, I mean, all things are all
Sure.
balanced.
Yeah.
There's give and take, you know, there's love and there's abstinence. Where are we, you know, something going on.
So Bob isn't alone his whole life. This passage you referenced Ethan already, that he has a friendship with Ethan.
Yeah.
He's married to Connie for a time, but he loses both as you said. So does he learn a lesson about it's not worth the bother somehow, because he doesn't really make a connection for a long time after?
Yeah, I don't know if he necessarily overtly swears off camaraderie or romance, but it never comes his way. And it came his way in a way that sort of happened to him. With Connie and Ethan both, they sort of thrust themselves upon Bob. And I think he would have been open to that happening again. He's definitely open to the idea of reconciliation with Connie that never occurs. Spoiler. Sorry. But I think that is sort of the border of one life. There's life A and life B, and life B is him recognizing who he is, you know, according to the rest of the book, which is somebody who does not have those things. He does not necessarily crave them. You know, he feels his fair share of melancholy or worse, but he's not dissatisfied, he's not embittered. The criticism that's coming out against Bob is that he's boring, and I recognize that that's one way to read him, but just to go on record, it's saying that I'm finding boring.
No, I didn't either. It's a quiet book, but
Yeah.
I found him compelling. He does have one big act in his life, his adventure. He runs away and ends up at the Hotel Elva.
Yeah.
So he needed one big act for the story.
Yeah, I wanted to show him actively moving towards something. I wanted to show him, I want good things to come to him through his agency. Because as I said, he's quite more passive or more of a watcher. But in this one instant, when he's 11 years of age, last days of the Second World War, he runs away from home, and he has an adventure in that he makes friends. These are fleeting friendships and can't last because the way they're set up because of his age and his being a runaway. But it's the kind of thing, at the beginning of the book, we recognize him, he's still dreaming about the Hotel Elba. And he's 72 or something, he's still dreaming of it, and it's still very vivid in his mind. So it's meaningful to him. And I think he takes pride in the fact that it never run away. So That accounts for that section.
You mentioned passive a few times. Back to the French exit for a moment. Francis says, I've adopted an attitude of pure passivity, it seems. Perhaps I'm simply tired. Yes, I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
And Bob obviously is very passive as well. And I'm curious, both of them are, I don't know, I forget how old Francis is, but Bob's in his 70s and Francis is thereabouts. And so I'm curious what aging has to do with this. They both become more and more passive. Retire is a word that's not that far away from all this.
I think with Frances, she's giving up. And that's just what the story's about. She's giving up because she feels overwhelmed by her dearth of successes, per her definition of that word. Certainly not a commentary on age. I have a great, this book, I should say, the impetus of this book was pre-COVID. I began helping out in the senior center. That was not the senior center in the book, but it was, I wouldn't have written this book, I don't think, if I hadn't begun helping out in the senior center. There's one or two sessions that are from life, but generally speaking, it's the best. But, I came away from my experience, which was shut down by COVID, with such an affinity and sense of gratitude that I developed in the lives of these strangers who were most of them over 70, and some of whom I became friends with, to the point that I was writing letters all through the pandemic and all that stuff. Something really sad happened, actually. My favorite was a man named Marcel. I forget his name. It's terrible. Let's just say it was Marcel. Following me out. Anyway, I wrote him a bunch of letters, and it was like he wasn't going to reply because he couldn't, because he was just infirm and couldn't respond. But I was told through the director of the center that he was drunk. So he and I always had a really wonderful rapport. He was just the sweetest man. And then one day, let's say I wrote him 25 letters. 15 came back in a bundle. And I knew that it meant that he died.
Oh.
And he had. It was really sad. And I can't bring myself to open up the letters because it was just the most banal gossip. He just wanted gossip. He was always sort of, what's going on? Yeah, girlfriend. He was so curious about life. It was really charming. So every of these, it was more or less like diary. At some point, I'll open them and look at them, but now they're just in the drawer. Anyway, I was so charmed by these men and women that I met, and I just came away with a great affinity for. I think that there is definitely a phenomenon of people over a certain age. We're talking about debut authors, and this is important, but there's so much of a spotlight on authors under a certain age. And I don't see that. I think that new authors should be welcomed in and given their due, but I don't see the relevance of an age in the arts. Doesn't make sense. Just focus on whatever's best. Yeah. Anyway, I became friendly with these people, and I recognize that, generally speaking, people of a certain age aren't really being given their due, given their time. And these people, I mean, the stories these men and women told me were remarkable. Why aren't we hearing more of these stories? Why don't we ask more? And I felt that, like, I'm guilty of this as well, I was. So I'm rambling, I recognize that, but if I would hate for anyone to read my work and draw a parallel between passivity and age, because I don't think this is necessarily. I think it's specific to characters, sure, but one doesn't lead to that.
I was thinking of it almost like the balance changing as one gets into retirement. I felt for Bob. I thought, wow, what a calm, kind of nice life, and yet then I thought, well, but I would advise my children to be as passive. It's not good advice for 18-year-olds.
No,
but it seems like good advice for a 71-year-old.
I think Bob is somebody who gets to know himself, and when most people don't, and he recognizes his limitations at a very early age, and he seeks to, which I think is admirable.
So something changes for him with the senior center when he comes to, you described the building and it reminds him of the Hotel Alba, so he goes, it somehow prompts that big act in his life. But then you also describe the center as a cliche of a haunted house, so somehow it provokes maybe the ghosts of his life and spurs him back to his life. Is that
I hadn't done it, but that sounds good. Yeah. I had a building in mind in Portland, and I had a house in mind. I described it as a mid-colored house, because my ex-girlfriend and I had a mid-colored house. Part of being a writer is just this sort of magpie existence that we have, where we see things, something's fascinating, and we file it away, and then later dust it off, use it or don't. It's just a graveyard, I think, most of our brains. And those are all things that just came to me. Writing about Portland was interesting. I didn't plan to write about the city I live in now. I seem to prefer, some authors really excel at place, sense of place, and I don't think I'm necessarily one of them. And this book could be written anywhere else, but it was enjoyable to engage in actual landscape and actual people, scenes, stores, things like that.
Okay. So you see the place that I would not feel that.
Yeah. The senior center, I think, is actually a wellness center, but it just looks to me like decidedly haunted, almost cliche haunted house. So I did want to put that in there.
Mm-hmm. I understand that you're a big fan of Emily Dickinson, and there's a poem you quoted very near the end of French Exit again. But are not all facts dreams as soon as we put them behind us? And that arrived in that book at just the right, perfect time. It was so poignant. So what's your relationship with Emily Dickinson?
It's not so different as my relationship to any of the other authors who I hold at that level, which is the highest level. Emily Dickinson is somebody whose work is endlessly mysterious to me, so that I will read a poem of hers that I hadn't, something that I looked at for the first time, let's say 15 years ago, and which I appreciated, but which didn't come to life necessarily. And a line like that is probably a good example of that, where when Emily Dickinson hits you and it makes sense to you, it's just like this quivering bullseye. I mean, it's just she's so powerful and so good and so strong in her modesty. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
She could describe the most complicated emotional aspects of her life in these sort of cast off, almost as if it was a note for a poem to be written later, but no, that was the poem. I just admire people that work at that level. She's a freak. I mean, in the best way. I mean, like, some people can jump higher than other people to the point that becomes their job. Jumping high is their job. They go to the Olympics and their shoes named after them. They're, for whatever reason, they can do this thing.
Yeah.
And all my favorite authors, I think, tend to be freaks. Unique. Freaks, that sounds pejorative. I don't mean it in a negative way. These are people who have my admiration, and this is what I think we all authors are aiming for. It's foolish to aim for it, but I think that everyone has a sort of secret hope. Maybe at some point we'll write a line like that.
Yeah, for sure. That's you have to be really good to be published, but then you have to be really good to be read widely and appreciated widely. And
I mean, there's a lot of those people who are read widely who aren't that good.
Fair enough.
Oh, same internet. I don't even know I feel it. But their work comforts or resonates in some way. I think the hard thing, the truly hard thing, is to write really personally and still have it transcend and reach a lot of people. So all my work, even though most of it isn't about me, is very private. And I always feel naked on publication day because I feel like I'm showing notes from therapy sessions or something like that. When somebody reads these private notes and it resonates with them, it's so meaningful to me. It makes the world feel smaller in a good way. And sometimes it'll happen where it'll be somebody who's read the work in translation, and that becomes ever more strange and wonderful.
Did you really lose a good portion of this book and have to start again?
This book was difficult to write for quite a few different reasons, but it did feel sort of cursed in the beginning, in that in the beginning it was Connie's story, and Connie was a retired librarian, and Bob Comet was
she bumps into a homeless man one day downtown Portland, and he asks her for $1. Are homeless people asking for specific amounts of money up here too? Is that just a Portland thing? They seem to have hard numbers. $1, give $1.50. Anyway, the man asks her for $1, and she recognized the voice and turns around, and it's her ex-husband, whose name was Bob Comet, but who in the book was much more like, the original book was much more like Ethan. He was quite a wild man. He was sort of like this post-beatnik maniac, basically, but lovable maniac. But this was the beginning of the book, and I thought it was a good start for a book, and nothing happened. They didn't reconcile, but she became friends with him as a homeless man. And it was her ex-husband, and she helped him in some small way. Anyway, it felt really promising and felt really rich to me. Okay, this is gonna be great. And it was just DOA. It was just DOA. I pushed and pushed, but it didn't really give me much back. And then I started thinking of focusing more on Bob and less on Connie. And that became interesting, but I didn't really like his personality very much. And so he began to sort of soften, and he just softened and softened, and he became a librarian. I finally figured out, it was like 8 months into working every day, on this, and I finally figured out more or less who he was. And I started writing the runaway scene, which is the scene of him as a young boy, first. It was going to be told chronologically. And I got 50 clean pages, and I really liked it, and I was really excited, and I was finally up and running, and it had been such a drag to get there, but here I was, okay. And then one day I woke up, and I'd never titled the file, and I don't have Wi-Fi at home or on my phone, and it wasn't there. It was called file 11 or whatever, something 11. And 10 was there, 12 was there, 11 was just gone. And I took it to a computer wizard, and the computer wizard said, "It's there." I was really upset. And I come in like foaming at the mouth and screaming. He's like, "It's there. Don't worry, I'll find it." And he takes it away and he comes back and he's like, "It's just not there." And I said, "I know." And he said, "Did you title it file 11? And I said, "No, that was just the automatic title." He said, if you just titled it something, it would be there, but it's not there." And he said, "But I've got this guy. This is like my guru. It's like my Yoda. He gives me the card of this other guy." And they bring it to the guy, and the guy says, "It's there, don't worry about it." And he comes back 10 minutes later, he's like, "Wow, it's really just gone." And then there was a third guy that was friends with my mother, and same thing. Nobody could find it. And I went to Australia for a festival like the day after my recognition that I lost it. Now, it's been asked of me, why don't you just rewrite it? It's all fresh in your mind. But I have to say that that's probably impossible. And it's very much like if you painted a painting and the painting was destroyed, and somebody said, "Well, just paint the painting." You could get an approximation of the painting, but it wouldn't be the same painting. And the idea of trying never even occurred to me, right? So I go to Australia and I'm doing interviews. I'm telling everyone, I just lost my book. I'm an idiot. I don't know how to use computers. I give up on the book. It doesn't want to be written. I have this other idea. I'm going to write this other book. And then I started dreaming about the book when I was down there. It started really bothering me. And it just bothered me enough that I thought, I'm not going to abandon the book. I'm going to win the book back. But I can't bear to write the runaway scene now. So I'm going to write the end scenes in the beginning and write in reverse chronological order, knowing that I would reverse that when I edited it, put it all on the line. But that's not what happened. So I wrote it in reverse chronological order and wound up liking it more that way. And when I got to the dreaded scene that I'd lost, I had a more or less new set of rules in terms of the rules of the universe. The book had evolved. So it was almost like, it wasn't like I was trying to repaint the painting. It was sort of like I was, painting a painting inspired by this other painting, but it wasn't ever going to be the same. Anyway, I was so relieved to get back to the runaway scene. I think I kind of overwrote it. I think it's supposed to be like a 40-page scene, and it's like a novella. And I'm getting kind of a bit of flack from the people who don't like the book. The reason they don't like it is because of that scene. It's like, what? You're reading a book, and all of a sudden it's this other book, and then it goes back to the original book after. It's making them peevish. But I'm sorry to those people, but I don't feel that way. I cut a lot actually of the runaway scene. I could have written a full book's worth of that world because I was enjoying being in it. It was such a relief to be back in it and be okay. It not be an agonizing recreation. I felt inspired.
Good. And there's so many great characters in that scene too.
A lot to work with.
Wow.
Yeah.
That sounds like the writer's nightmare, right? I'm glad it has a happy ending.
Yeah, bad.
So I give you a heads up of what my last question was going to be, because I know from experience you can get caught in the headlights on it. But
Yeah.
like a book recommendation, just what would you recommend people read, either recent anytime?
We talked about this a bit in the back. People have been drawing parallels between this book of mine and a book called Stoner, which was very popular. It was repressed and did really much better the second time around. I think it came out in the 50s. But it's written about, I haven't read it in a minute, but it's written about, I believe it's academia and campus novel in the 30s, I think, or 40s. And it's about like the characters, the professor's name is Stoner. And it's a beautiful, beautiful book. It's very special. It's deeply melancholic, edging into whatever is worse than melancholy. It's like melancholic plus, it's a little bit, oof. But just incredibly well done and worth your time. And then the other book that I mentioned backstage, which I've brought up probably too many times, but it is something that I like to spread around because when it hits for people, it hits them deeply, is a book called Two Serious Ladies by Jane Bowles. And I was thinking of the third section, the runaway scene, he's taken in by these two, I don't know how you describe them, avant-garde playwrights, pacifist lesbian playwrights, I'm not sure. They have dogs and they do these big sort of song and dance, and they're artists, capital A artists. And they're very much on the outskirts of like a, cultural society, just doing their thing and living within the rules of their own making. And they reminded me, or it's sort of a homage to Miss Bowles, who had a difficult life and only wrote one novel. And it's a novel that's quite slim and is quite frustrating to some people. And we talked about frequency back in the other room. If you read this book and it doesn't make sense to you in the first 20 pages, then just put it aside. It doesn't mean anything. Some of my best friends don't like Jane Bowles. And it's just a frequency, either gets you or it doesn't. But to me, it's a book that I can return to over and over again. And I'm just in awe and admiration for her version of the world and what she has to say about it and what she doesn't have to say. A big part of my enjoyment of Two Serious Ladies is what she omits. It never, ever, ever goes where you think it should go or could go. It always goes some other place. But then when you look back, when it's all done, you see that it could only have been written that way. And the idea of omission was in my mind a lot when I was writing this book, and there's a lot that I didn't show. There's a lot that's referenced and told, but then not shown. And I'm doing this on purpose. And it's not to frustrate. I just think that there's the idea of saying less, showing less, doing less. I think it's just a natural part of an average artist's progression. You tend to become more minimalist or arcane in what you share. And I felt that impulse strongly in the writing of this book. Hopefully the idea, again, it's not looking to frustrate anyone, it's just sort of looking for the full emotional experience, but arriving at it in a new way, or a way that was not foreseeable.
Very good. Well, thank you for those. John, let's put it to the audience to make them a little more active than sitting around doing nothing.
Perfect. So we do have one quick question from the internet, and that comes courtesy of Dean, who asks, are there any comic elements of your work that you have had to pare back for fear they would upset the tone or flow of the story? Or do you just let these things carry you away if you enjoy them?
That's a great question, Dean. Thank you, Dean. I've never been asked that, and it's actually something that I'm happy to talk about. I have a comedic impulse. You wouldn't necessarily know it by talking to me because I'm not that funny person. But I have a comedic impulse in my writing, which is relentless, and I think that it's the primary drive of my work. Is quipping and idiosyncratic dialogue and oddity, weirdness, whatever, skewed reality. And I always have to cut what I think of as quality comic writing with every book, because it does overwhelm. And it's so much about finding the balance of the sorrowful elements in conjunction with the bleaker elements, in conjunction with the comedic elements. And it's hard to balance those things, and that's the job. That's really the job, is finding that balance so that it tastes correct, again, for my standards. But there's always too much comment. And it's not true for the melancholy. It's, you know, the other things seem to come out in proper portions. But I always have to cut back any number of scenes that I think are funny and that they're quality in terms of being comedic. But at a certain point, comedy threatens to take over a text and it becomes only funny. Not that that's an easy thing to do, and I don't speak poorly of people who write strict comic novels, but that's not my aim. So.
There we go.
I'm just curious about your process. You've sort of described how these characters have changed and how did, like, you get 50 pages and then you say, no, the character isn't like that, or do you put that on the page, or?
Yeah, I mean, the proof's in the pudding, and that if I sit down in the morning and I'm excited, then I'm on to something. And if it's a struggle, then I think writing for a lot of people is quite a struggle, and that it's a sense of wrestling or I know lots of writers whereby writing can be quite painful, and the process that's just needed. And it's not how it is for me. When things are going the way that I want them to be going, I'm really enjoying it, and I look forward to the work. I'll work 7 days a week. So that's not the norm. Oftentimes it's somewhere in between the two poles of like joyful, you know, and then ripping my hair out. But if the needle is going more and more often towards ripping my hair out or yawning or whatever, then I know that there's been an error. And typically it's my fault ultimately, but I like to blame the characters because it's easier for me. But it just comes down to feeling. You have a sense of it when you sit down in the morning, this is going well. And then other days not. And if it's not for a number of days in a row, then I begin to look at the text critically from the distance. What's missing, or something's wrong, what is it? So it's like sniffing out what's going wrong, and then oftentimes I'll pare back to where things went wrong, and I'll cut and I'll rewrite. Sometimes it's just odd characters. Sometimes there's no norm, there's no rules in terms of. That's another thing. Even with the problems, like it's an ever-evolving situation. Probably all the arts are like that, but with this job, it's like oftentimes everything will be. So I was speaking about earlier today, this book was written entirely in first person. It's in third person now, it's published in third person. But I wrote it, submitted it, it was accepted by all the publishers, and it was Bob saying, I did this, I did that. And there was always something, I had any number of breakthroughs, feeling the sense of breakthrough writing this book, but there was always something where no matter the size of the breakthrough, or no matter how well it was going or how pleased I was with it, there was always something that was the matter and I couldn't put my finger on. And it wasn't until I finished it, lived with it for months, I was just ahead of going through copy edits. And again, everyone accepted it. They're like, yes, this is a good book, we're happy with it. And then I went to my US editor and I said, I just don't think Bob would say this much. I just don't believe he would talk this much. It goes against type. And it's bothering me, and I'm going to rewrite the entire book in third person. And she was just like, okay, whatever you want to do, Pat. But I think that solved the problem. Anyway, that feeling that I'd had was gone. That feeling that something was the matter was lifted. So that's the process, really, is just sort of wondering and listening and looking at the thing, almost like a patient. A doctor looks at a patient. How are we doing today? And then if something is the matter, then you try to heal it. And if you can't, then you destroy it.
And we have time for 2 more questions. There's one over here and there's one over there.
Hello, I think my question has a little bit of a different direction, but over the past years, a few of your books, namely Sisters, Brothers, and French Exit, have been adapted to major motion films. And while watching the Sisters Brothers, I was disappointed that you didn't make a cameo as a fellow gunslinger, and you fit the role perfectly. So, my question is, if any other works of yours, novels, are to be adapted in the future, have you or would you consider making any cameos either in past works or in the future?
I would actually. They asked me to do a cameo. I was on the set of French Exit and it was on a soundstage in Montreal. And there's a scene where Francis and Malcolm are being driven to the cruise ship. And I think actually the driver's cut, but they asked me to be the driver, dress up like the driver. I couldn't do it, I didn't want to do it. I suddenly got really self-conscious. You know, it's like I go be in the scene with Michelle Pfeiffer and Lucas Hedges. I just thought I just can't do it. But I do have a cameo in a Kelly Reichardt movie. Kelly is a director who lives in Portland half the year, and she's my pal. And she did a wonderful movie called First Cow. And it's me, it's like a sort of Portland group of, it's me and Steve Malcolmus is my neighbor from Pavement, and he's playing a fiddle, and I'm reading the paper, this fake paper, and I'm covered in filth. And I look like I'm 100 years old because I'm covered in filth, not because I look 100 years old. And then my son has a cameo in Kelly's next movie. This is not what you want to talk about, I recognize, but I'm going to give my son, if you see it, she has a movie out now, and it's called Showing Up. And there's a scene where this lanky skater kid skates down the street, and that's my son. So we have acting interests in my family. I don't know that I could ever actually really say any words, but I could sit there and believably read a fake paper. Yeah.
Hi, last time you were here, you mentioned that when you wrote French Exit, you were listening to a lot of the Ethiopian pianist Emma Hoy.
Singing Mary McGibbon.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just wondering if there's anything that you listened to while writing this book.
You know, that was really the only book where I relied on a piece of music. And typically I really need silence. And if music's on, even if it's, particularly if there's lyrics, if there's like singing in English, I don't like that to happen when I'm writing fiction. But even, you know, instrumental music, generally speaking, I can't have it on because it takes me out of it. There's something about, I mean, I listened to that one record hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times through the writing of that book, and it became a sort of Pavlovian instigator, and then I would put it on, and then it was time to do this work, and it really made it, it simplified it in some way, but I think I just got lucky. You know, I listen to music all the time, it's a big part of my life, but generally speaking, if I'm working, then I need quiet.
Thank you so much. Now, Chris and Patrick, if you have any closing comments you might like to make, please feel free, and then we'll lure Charlene up to the front to chat.
You did have a cocktail in the French Exit, the Corpse Reviver, which was just perfect for that one, but Bob didn't get a cocktail. So
No, that's a real cocktail though, and it's, I think the recipe's in the book.
it is, I know I'm gonna try it.
Yeah, I don't imbibe these days, but I did like, I had any number of those in my day, and they're good. I just want to say that it's so wonderful that you guys came here to the reading. And sometimes you come to readings and there's 3 or 4 people there, and that's special in its way. Like there's something to be said for that, but I prefer this. And just knowing that the Winnipeggans are coming out, it just means a lot to me, and I thank you very much. I watched Guy Madden's My Winnipeg 4 days ago because it was playing in the theater, and I love Guy Madden, and I love that movie, but I thought I've seen it too many times maybe, I don't know if I need to see it again, but seeing something in the theater is always nice. And then I thought, I'm the only person in this movie theater and maybe in the world who's watching My Winnipeg and is then immediately going to Winnipeg from another country. And I said this to my friend Kelly, who put me in her movie, and she said, well, it's probably happened to Guy Madden. That he watch it at a festival and return. But I've been looking around, I'm seeing it differently now, and looking for like the hermaphrodite streak that he references in the movie. And it's a wonderful movie. He's a wonderful artist. You guys are lucky to have Guy Madden around. But it also just made me really excited to come. And yeah, just in summation, thank you so much for caring.
Well, it's a great thrill to have you here.
Wow, was that wow? One more round, please. Great conversation. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Pat. Just, it just gets me excited to, this is an exciting time. As you probably gathered from something John said earlier, we're just on the cusp of Thin Air Festival, and you were here for that. You were on our stage, and
yeah.
I think it was maybe geez, I can't remember which.
I remember I went to the Bay. Oh, it's closed. I went to the Bay, and the Bay is closed now.
Yeah, the Bay is gone. Yeah.
I got these great socks from the Bay, and I was like, I need to get more of those socks. And then I went down there today, and they're closed.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
It's all right.
Things die.
Yeah.
Sometimes,
Sometimes you don't get socks.
You sometimes don't get socks. There might be other socks though in the city.
I have my
There's a
own
few
already.
socks.
It's fine.
You got your socks. You want your head socks. So I think that tonight's conversation and the presence of all of you here is a great harbinger of what's ahead for us this month, because this is kind of the kickoff or the teaser, I guess, to the festival, which starts on September 20th. And let me just give you a list of the people who are going to be here in this kind of setting. Starting on the 21st, we've got David Bergen, Joan Thomas, Jordan Abel, Beatrice Mosionier, Daryl McLeod, Casey Plett, Alicia Elliott, John Clausen, Anna Donahue, Michael Crummy, and then shortly after that, Wabadishig Rice. Is that a great lineup or what? I'm so excited. So there's a lot of events here because McNally Robinson is, as all of you know, the best bookstore on the planet and a great host. So can we make a big noise for him? I think the Wizard of Oz will be here for quite a bit of it too. John, thank you, John, for always making the tech go well. You didn't know that was Wizard of Oz right there? This year we're actually printing programs for the festival because we're gradually doing more things in person because we're all bravely coming out, right, and gathering, which is really wonderful. There'll be sort of a little cool brochure, very colorful, and it is arriving tomorrow. So at some point tomorrow, there'll be boxes of brochures arriving here. So you can pick them up here, you can pick them up at various cafes, libraries. Give us a few days to get them circulating, but please do, and come to as many things as you can. There's also a lot of stuff online, starting on September 20th. So there's a 24/7 visit. You can see all of our authors have made really cool little videos about their books and about their writing process. So there's kind of a great exploration there. So I hope you'll all come back. And you can find out all sorts of things on the McNally Robinson website, as well as on our website, which is thinairwinnipeg.ca. And now, because you've been so excellent for so long, there's one more thing to do, which is go over there and get your book signed, but you're not allowed to move until Patrick has been transported there. I'm not sure what mode of transportation, but John always has something up his sleeve. So will you join me one more time in giving a really big round of applause to Patrick?